Hello, Urban Resilience community, and welcome everyone to tonight's Resilient Cities for a Safe and Equitable World plenary session. I am Lauren Sorkin, Executive Director of the Resilient Cities Network. This moment is one that I have been looking forward to for more than a year. Granted, it's not happening exactly the way I imagined it, but I'm still standing here looking at the faces of the people that drive resilience action globally. And I'm smiling. I'm smiling because we did it. Last year in Rotterdam, in a beautiful church, I promised member cities and CROs in this network that they would become co-owners of a social enterprise, one that was positioned to solve our greatest challenges together. And now you are. This past year, we transformed what was formerly a project, supported by a single donor, into Resilient Cities Network, an independent city-led network organization with programs for collective action that are supported by more than 8 funding partners. This organization has a fundamentally different approach to growing this movement. We are city-led, and our 2 governance bodies, the Global Steering Committee and an independent board of directors, advise us and ensure we continue on a path of sustainability and impact that is responsive to resilience building needs of members. Perhaps what I'm the most proud of is that today, building on the legacy of 100RC, we have turned a new page. This network, and most importantly, its membership, are recognized as an incredible global asset. And in this, a profoundly humbling year, as a force of stability, providing resilience knowledge and practice that are more critical than ever before. So tonight, I'm looking forward to doing what I love doing most with this network, which is asking probing questions and facilitating interactions between the brilliant minds that comprise it, from our cities to partners and investors. And I'm really thrilled to be involving a new and highly anticipated group of participants, our alumni CROs, who continue to expand the practice of resilience in myriad ways. Before I turn it over to Grania and Mike to speak about the network's new direction on behalf of the Global Steering Committee, I wish to say thank you. First, a huge thank you to all of the members of the Global Steering Committee, and I need to take a moment to list all of them by name. Adriana Campello from Salvador, Grania Long from Belfast, Marissa Aho from Houston, Arnaud Molinar from Rotterdam, Brian Strong from San Francisco, David Greisman from Buenos Aires, Gareth Morgan from Cape Town, Jafeth Habenchudi from Kigali, Mahesh Harhare from Pune, and Mike Gululi from Christchurch. And to each and every one of the CROs who took part in the co-design sessions that built this organization from the ground up. Thank you so much. And to the funders and partners who stepped forward to work with this network, Temasek Foundation International, the Circulate Initiative, the Oceans Conservancy, the Rockefeller Foundation, the World Resources Institute, the World Bank and the Resilience Shift, Visa, and the Economic Development Board of Singapore. This is truly a diverse and resilient partner base for a diverse Resilient Cities network. I want to thank our incoming board of directors, some of whom you'll hear from tonight, for joining us in this mission. Last, and certainly not least, I want to give a deep personal thank you to the professional staff of the Resilient Cities Network for your commitment and your incredibly hard work over the last year to get us to this moment. And now, it gives me incredible joy to introduce the 2 co-chairs of the Global Steering Committee, a bit about my terrific colleagues before they begin. Grania Long is Belfast's first Commissioner of Resilience, and she was appointed in 2018 June. She's also Senior Independent Director of Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, a housing association that's responsible for more than 58,000 homes across London and elsewhere in England. And Mike Gululi, who was appointed as the first Chief Resilience Officer in Christchurch in 2014. And prior to this, Mike was Land Drainage Operations Manager for Christchurch City Council. Mike has deep experience with disaster and emergency response and is often called on by his national government to serve in times of crisis. Grania and Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It is so exciting to be here at this moment. The wonderful introduction from you, Lauren, really this is a huge celebration for all of us. For those of you that I haven't met, I am Mike Gululi, the CRO for Christchurch. I've been in the role for 6 years, and we released our strategy in 2016. And I've been permanently in the role since that time. I've got a small team supporting me. Look, all of our journeys are different. All of our cities exist in a unique context, but we're all bound by this common theme of resilience and building the practice of urban resilience across the world globally. So lovely to see you all. And Grania, if you just want to take some time to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Mike. I just want to echo that point that I'm just as excited as others. I think we've all waited for today for quite some time, and it's wonderful to finally be here. I am Commissioner for Resilience for the city of Belfast, which is the capital city in Northern Ireland. We're a port city, a university city, a very young city in terms of our population, and 20 years on from a peace agreement that's probably globally well known. We are now really building a city that is thriving and that has a very strong future ahead of it. And while we have been affected, just like many other cities, by the pandemic, and it's really affected many communities, but particularly our most deprived communities, we have a very strong plan for how we go forward. But that plan has been influenced by so many of the cities in this network. So I'm very, very grateful to colleagues for what they've helped to teach me over this period. And it's an extremely exciting time, I think, for all of us. So there's never been a better time and a more important time, I think, for a global network of resilience practitioners. And I think I'm telling you what you already know in terms of saying that. But I think when you see the scale of the collaboration across our cities, that's why Mike and myself and others on the Global Steering Committee have been working in a very collaborative way over the last number of months to really put together a framework for this new organisation with a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of mission. And hopefully you'll see that today and you'll hear what we intend to do and how we intend to go about it. I want to just let you see the photos of my colleagues from the Global Steering Committee. And I suppose our role is to be the heart and soul of this organisation. As resilience practitioners, we are, along with our colleagues in our organisations, are on the front line of resilience practice in terms of whether it's economic resilience and climate resilience, in my case, or whether it's emergency planning and other forms of water resilience and other forms of resilience in other cities. We work together, we learn from each other, but the Global Steering Committee really, it's our job, and we are duty bound to do this to ensure that the questions and the answers that we are receiving and gathering across cities globally, and we're feeding those forward into how we put our strategy together and how the Board of Directors now does that. So I'm really thrilled that we're now finally at a place to welcome our Board of Directors. I think you'll see this, the calibre of our new directors as a statement of intent from our organisation as to how serious we are about the future of resilience practice. So I'm really thrilled that Mayor Turner, the Mayor of Houston, is our chair, Nena Batra, the chair and CEO of ABPN, Daniel Stander, Senior Advisor at the United Nations, and Same Waba, who is Global Director at the World Bank, are going to work together to lead our organisation. And I'm really thrilled that they're here and that we'll hear from them today. I think that gives you a strong sense of where we are going as an organisation and, as I say, the seriousness of intent. But our mission is clear. And I think our mission speaks to what we've learned from listening to our colleagues globally around what we need now as we think forward in this decade and beyond for what resilience practice means. It means a focus, a really strong, a ruthless focus, if you will, on reducing vulnerability and improving the well-being of over 220 million people who live in cities and urban dwellers across the globe. And we're really serious when we say, and we use those terms, arm in arm, member cities, and building a safer, more equitable and sustainable future. That's what those years of learning about resilience practice up to now have shown us, the importance of collaboration, of sharing knowledge and practice. And as I say, for those of us who are commissioners for resilience or chief resilience officers in cities around the world, we've learned in very practical terms, sometimes you're one of a very small number of people focused on these issues. And some of the problems we're trying to solve are wicked problems. They take time, they take people, they take resource, and they take collaboration. So it would be impossible for any one single person or small team in a city to solve these problems by themselves. That's why we need a Resilient Cities Network, and that's why there was a resounding yes from across the practice community that we build this work, we put a strong mission together, and we go forward. Mike is going to tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing and what we plan to do in relation to the pandemic. So Mike, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Grania. And yeah, it's really important that we all understand that it's not just the not just the Global Steering Committee, who's been busy over this last 12 months. We totally acknowledge the 97 cities in the network, the 83 active CROs who have all been through the strategy process, and we've got 84 active strategies across the network. Everybody has had an incredibly busy year. At least a third of our CROs were active in the immediate response to COVID, and also active in recovery planning. I'd like to call out a couple of those examples because some of them really talk to the deep understanding of collaboration and resilience, and in particular Chennai and the great work that was done there, particularly supporting vulnerable communities and partnering with non-profits, businesses and government to supply vegetables, dry rations, all sourced from local farmers and retail stores and community kitchens. By the numbers, they've helped 54,000 people and delivered over 249,000 meals. Now that's clearly that's a response, but it's also highlighted the value of building a sustainable urban food system that reduces dependencies. And it's initiatives like this that we all join in and put our shoulders to the wheel that adds to the building this practice of urban resilience. Moving on from the immediate response and the great work in Chennai, London is supporting small businesses and community groups to not only simply recover from the current crisis, but to ensure that they're better prepared for future emergencies. So bouncing back and thriving through a resilience fund that's going to help small firms keep up with the accelerated pace of change after the pandemic and to prove their own resilience to future shocks. And Medellin. Medellin is in the throes of developing their own recovery plan, and they are using, and this is, I love this story, the City Resilience Framework to better understand how to strategically plan its response and recover from the pandemic of COVID-19. And that really talks to the qualities of resilience that we understand around being reflective, understanding and learning from the past, and taking that into how we can recover. So we need to continue pushing and engaging for resilience recovery and social cohesion, and this is going to be, I'm absolutely sure, a particular priority for us over the coming 12 months to maybe even 2 years until we're out of this crisis. Grania.
Thank you, Mike. And I think what you can also see is just how quickly we've had to move as an organisation in terms of developing the kinds of platforms and the kinds of knowledge exchange that you need. And this just gives you an example of some of the partnering that has gone on and how we've delivered that across a number of cities and made that available open source to cities that want to be part of this programme. So we've developed the speaker series with over 5,000 people having attended, and again I think that shows just the scale of the demand for sharing of practice like this. So if you haven't attended one of those events, please do, and we do need as many people involved and taking part. Those dedicated weekly briefings that I know certainly myself and my team spend time looking at to pull together international lessons on recovery, and then the toolkit for resilient recovery. Again, I suppose building on that really important area of practice around developing methodologies that are really practically focused, and I suppose many of us doing this day and daily, that's exactly what we need. We need practical methodologies, we need sharing and learning, but we need them available to us at speed. So I think all of us have responded really proactively and been able to take advantage and avail of those platforms, and really grateful to the World Bank and to colleagues across the Resilient Cities network for developing those so quickly. But of course, COVID-19 is not our only challenge, and across our cities, we are working really quickly and really rapidly to develop responses to climate change and to the issues around sustainability. Certainly across Northern Ireland and Ireland, even in the last few weeks, we've had a number of extreme weather events to contend with, and I'm sure all of you are very much involved in climate planning at a city level. So I just want to kind of talk you through and share some examples of practice that we've seen across our cities and that we've been sharing with each other. From our perspective as a UK city, as co-host along with Italy next year of the UN COP26 conference, being able to develop community-based and innovative solutions to climate change, both on the adaptation and the mitigation side, is so critically important. So New Orleans developing their citywide emergency generators program, ensuring backup power in the event of power loss, is a critical tool for that city, but I know many others have been looking at that as an example and looking at both the infrastructure required, the financing required, and how we can learn from such an approach as many cities prepare for prolonged power outages, the need for temporary shelters and so on. So New Orleans sharing its practice and sharing that knowledge to us. Cape Town's water strategy, a really big issue actually for a number of cities in the UK, the issue of water resilience and access to really excellent water infrastructure. And I know I've been in touch with colleagues in Cape Town in developing and learning from that water strategy, and in Addis upcoming water fund, really interesting and important work happening there to build water resilience in Addis Ababa. Christchurch, Mike, your 40-year infrastructure strategy, a huge area of learning, I think, for a number of cities as they think about how they integrate economic and climate strategy. And of course, Park Huitlahac, which is in your screen there, in Mexico City, nicknamed by city authorities as Resilient Huitlahac, at 145 hectare park, has turned upside down the basic premises of traditional green space for family entertainment using climate adaptation measures, circular economy and social engagement methods. So we've already agreed as a team, the first opportunity we get to travel to Mexico City, we will be taking it. And finally, to a really exciting Smart Cities mission program. The government of India, under that program, creating a climate centre for cities that aims to build climate action in Indian cities, and the centre will serve as a one-stop shop for bringing together diverse skills, resources and knowledge to support cities in implementing local action. So they're just an example of the kinds of practice and the kind of programs that US cities are bringing forward, sharing practice on that program. And I think it's that generosity of spirit during really, really busy periods. Still, my colleagues are making themselves available to me and to others, and giving cities the opportunity to learn from each other.
Thanks, Grania. It was about 5 or 6 years ago when I first got in the role, and I spent a very happy few weeks, or not few weeks actually, I'm a faster reader than that. It was a couple of days reading the Arup research into city resilience and how resilience might be defined and how you would recognise it when you see it. And that's where we developed the City Resilience Framework. And what I see and what I like about this particular project that you see on the slide in front of you about the urban water resilience in Africa, it talks to the presence or absence of certain drivers in all our cities that help us to understand where we sit in the resilience continuum. And building urban water resilience in Africa really talks to meeting basic needs, but also ensuring continuity of critical services, which are two really fundamental resilience drivers. But that's not the only great thing that's happening, and it would be really great sometime to have a much more in-depth conversation about this, particularly with our colleague Gareth Morgan and Jaffe Habichuti. But take some time to look at the numbers on the slide. We're partnering with the World Resources Institute. 3 African cities are engaged in respective countries. We've got a 12-month timeline to deliver a project of impact, and we've got $750,000 of leveraged funding. So when we're talking about building a network of cities that are delivering projects of impact, it is examples like this that I think we can use to continue to inspire us and learn from and build on. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is another example of a project which is actually near and dear to my heart. I like this project for a number of reasons. It talks to a very deep collaboration with funders and partners, but it also talks to those qualities of learning and learning from each other, and embedding projects that are going to have a real impact. So this project, Urban Ocean, is about building capacity and to accelerate project development to improve waste management and build circular economies in cities. It's also about understanding how we can stop plastic leaking into the oceans. But the great thing about this project is we've got 2 partners to help with, to assist with the funding. We've got 9 cities involved in this program, and I'd like to mention those specifically. We've got Rotterdam, Milan, Christchurch and Toyama engaging in a conversation and acting as mentor cities to Malacca, Semarang, Pune, Panama City and Kanto. And I'd like to call out and acknowledge the great work done by the staff at GRCN, who have really supported a deep collaboration to start to build and understand and design projects and initiatives that might actually help in these learning cities. But actually, we're all learning. No one's got the mortgage on urban resilience. So my deep desire is that those of you that have yet to engage in projects and initiatives, that when you look at something like this, that you're inspired to take part as a mentor, take part as a city that could learn something and engage with the network on these initiatives. They bring so much value to you personally, but also so much value to your city and other cities in the network. Grania.
Thanks, Mike. I suppose one of the things that was always going to be a challenge for us as an organisation was how we identify our priority areas. How do we prevent the urge to solve every problem, and by doing that spread ourselves too thin and suddenly find a number of years in that we haven't delivered. So we did spend a lot of time on priority areas, on where we should best focus our knowledge, our interest, our resources. And I'm really pleased that relatively quickly our priority areas formed for us, formed themselves, and we did that partly through our own discussion at a city level, with cities feeding into that process. But we've been really, really helped also by the organisations that support us, and you can see those on the slide in front of you. So we're focusing very strongly, as you would expect, and as we've said, on a COVID resilient recovery, but with a really strong focus on equity at its heart, and on economic opportunities. And those cities that are inclusive are also cities that are resilient. So that focus on equity and economic opportunity came out very strongly for us from cities as something they wanted to focus on. The second area of focus, and we've touched on it quite a bit, is on water resilience, but also on climate resilience, but also within that a very strong emphasis on water resilience, on community resilience, and on reducing energy poverty. And the third area, which we've covered, is the issue of the circular economy, so food systems and waste management. I think those 3 areas are broad enough to give appeal to many, many cities globally, but are focused enough that we prevent mission creep, and that we are where we want to be 3, 5 and 10 years now, solving and resolving those really difficult issues for us to solve, and doing it at a city level, but sharing practice globally. So just before I finish, and I'll move to the next slide, by just talking through very quickly, as I say, our continued approach to empowering colleagues within cities and empowering each other through exchange and collaboration, we are very focused on impact and on being able to take that knowledge as we share it to implement at delivery levels in cities. And those of us who work in city governments and city councils know that we are fundamentally delivery organisations. We are accountable to the people who we serve across our cities, and therefore we measure our impact by the effect that it has on people. So we are very much a delivery focused organisation, and of course in doing that we need to be clear and sure that we are measuring that impact and we are articulating it in the right way. So you'll see lots more of that, and I've no doubt our new board of directors will continue to ensure that we hold ourselves to account and that we are clear about our value and the value that we are creating. So my final thanks, of course, is to the team at the Resilient Cities Network have been phenomenally supportive to Mike and myself and other members of the Global Steering Committee. We're all really pleased that we are where we are today now with a fantastic board of directors, and as a Global Steering Committee you have our support, and we look forward to working with you, but most importantly to our member cities and to those of you watching who are part of that network. I think we're in a really good place. We have a very exciting but important year and years ahead of us, and I certainly look forward to working with you all, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Granny and Mike. Now I want to introduce a video from the new chairman of our board of directors. He is a champion for resilience in his city, Mayor Sylvester Turner. For those of you who don't know Mayor Turner, he's Houston's 62nd mayor, and he was recently re-elected for a second term in 2019. And since taking office, he's been expertly managing significant challenges facing the US's fourth largest city, including budget deficits, homelessness, natural disasters such as Hurricane Harvey. He's now leading Houston's response to COVID-19 amid national unrest, and he's successfully signed an executive order restricting the use of force and created a task force on policing reform. So here is Mayor Turner's message for the resilience community.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the global network of city officials, resilient officers, and resilience champions. I extend my best wishes to you and your communities during this most challenging time. Being a member and leader in the Global Resilient Cities Network is important for the city of Houston and for me as mayor, especially as we confront a global pandemic. I am proud and happy to serve on the GRCN Board of Directors. I look forward to working with my fellow board members, the GRCN team, and mayors and chief resilient officers from around the world to advance this critical work at such a critical time. This network is playing a major role in the ensuring a more just and green recovery from the COVID-19 global pandemic, and must continue to be at the forefront to ensure a more resilient recovery. In Houston, we know the devastation that a major disaster can cause. As we just commemorated the 3-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey a few weeks ago, it fell on the same week that Hurricane Laura nearly missed Houston and sadly devastated our neighbors in East Texas and West Louisiana. This network understands the compounding shocks and stresses that we all face. We also understand the need to implement the concepts and ideas we know will address health, equity, climate, economic, and build environment challenges we face. Congratulations on the 1-year anniversary of GRCN. I'm looking forward to all we can accomplish together in the next year.
Well, Mayor's call to action is very inspiring, and it reminds us of the importance of working together in this moment to advance projects and initiatives on the ground that will improve people's lives. And this is something that we strive to do through GRCN and the practice of resilience. Same Waba, who leads the World Bank's Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Land Use Global Practice, oversees a portfolio of close to $30 billion in commitments and about 450 staff. So he's no stranger to these kinds of issues. Same has recently joined our board, and he has a deep understanding of the emerging opportunities and challenges of cities, in particular, and protecting the world's most vulnerable populations. Same, would you share with us your reflections on the direction of the network?
Thank you, Lauren, and it's a pleasure for me to join you all over here. I mean, we've been at the World Bank, we've been collaborating with the predecessor of the Network 100 Resilient Cities Initiative, and it was a great collaboration. And so I was only delighted to come in and join you guys in the board of directors to help shape the direction of the network. And the network obviously is a unique network. I mean, it's a city-led network that brings a unique experience in the sense that it brings cities that are in the front line of work on resilience, a group of cities that were selected competitively, that demonstrated initiative, and that really has managed to galvanize a lot of expertise and resources over the years. So in this regard, with this unique expertise that the network and its member cities and member CROs bring, I mean, the network is uniquely positioned to share advice with other cities around the world on advancing and strengthening urban resilience. I mean, it's one thing to come as an academic, to come as a financier, and talk to cities about what might be done, what might need to be done. It's another thing to talk as a city to city, mayor to mayor, CRO to CRO to get to share experience. I mean, it's much more credible, and that strength is the strength of the network. So for me, I mean, the direction that the network is taking and should be taking is really figuring out how to amplify the impact globally of this agenda of urban resilience. And for me, the three pillars of doing that are helping scale up planning for resilience. So, I mean, what type of tools might be needed to enable the development of resilience plans and strategies, but implementable resilience plans and strategies, and to translate these into investment projects. The second pillar is financing for resilience, because it's one thing to prepare all these investments. It's another thing to be able to mobilize the financing that's needed to help move the needle. And I think in this regard, this will be for the large majority of the cities around the world, or at least the cities that we work with at the World Bank as partners, will be a major ask for them is that dimension of financing, just because, you know, there's always challenges as far as own source revenue generation, as far as intergovernmental fiscal transfers, which tend to be opaque and non-formula based and really very much prone to politics all over the world, and then quite a bit of lack of city credit worthiness, and the fact that much of concessional financing requires sovereign guarantees. I mean, cities often find themselves really at the front line of the work, but lacking the resources that are commensurate with their responsibility. So the positioning of the network in there and being able to share experience and avail tools and coalesce partners from around the world, because it's the partnerships of 100 different cities plus those of the network itself will be critical. And that's the third pillar for me, which is partnerships for resilience. So I think the network is very well positioned along these lines. These, by the way, are the three pillars of our city resilience program, CRP, at the World Bank, which is our flagship program to scale up resilience, and the one with which we've been collaborating with 100RC and now with the network. We've done together in our collaboration also the Cities on the Frontline series in terms of the COVID response. And I think it was really critical to showcase the amount of work that cities have been doing. And in many ways, when you look at stimulus packages, it's not always that cities and local governments are positioned in these stimulus packages. There's a lot of focus on what can we do about the private sector, what can we do about the poor and vulnerable, and how can we jumpstart the economy. But there tends to be, you know, this, if you will, troops totally on the front line in the form of cities, disaster risk management agencies, whose role is critical but might not be well recognized. But then initiatives like Cities in the Frontline have been critical in positioning cities and explaining the amount of work that goes behind the scene. So for me, I mean, again, you know, Grania and Mike spoke about, you know, the various themes and the, you know, the challenge of trying to position around mission creep. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a holistic agenda. You can't really untangle it into a few sectors or few interventions. I mean, you need to continue approaching it holistically. But for me, I guess the key emphasis, and maybe that's one that I can maybe help the network with, is to continue focusing on the financing, because translating all these partnerships, plans, strategies into implementable projects is what's critical for mayors at the end of the day. I mean, if you want this agenda to continue growing, you know, I mean, the mayors want to deliver for their constituencies, and, you know, enabling the financing in there would be critical. So, I mean, I think, you know, to conclude, I mean, delighted to be here with you. It's a great network, and I think, you know, the decision to maintain it and put it on sustainable footing as a city-led network has been fantastic. I'm happy to support you on the way forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sami. We're so happy to have you working with us to deliver. The issues you outlined, advancing planning, financing, and project implementation by sharing knowledge and bringing together partnership, really do highlight the need for leadership. So with that, I want to transition this session to the next part, which is a panel discussion on resilience leadership. The theme of this panel is directly inspired by our recent work with the Resilience Shift. Every week for 14 weeks throughout the pandemic, we interviewed 5 CROs and 7 CEOs to capture their evolving reflections on the crisis and the implications on their leadership in real time. The participants and their reflections later dubbed this project as resilience therapy. To them, in a rapidly evolving, time-pressured crisis, it was a valuable moment to stand still and take stock of what was happening. And the project revealed so many powerful insights, we felt the need to dedicate more time to the subject here. So I want to briefly introduce tonight's speakers on the panel discussion to you. As we're a city-led network, we are going to have 2 cities leading off the discussion, and so let me share a bit about their background. Adriana Campelo will lead us off. She is Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Salvador in Brazil, and she's the Director of Resilience at the Municipal Secretariat for Sustainability, Innovation, and Resilience. She led Salvador's resilience strategy and is currently coordinating the Climate Action and Adaptation and Mitigation Plan. Ron Harris is the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Minneapolis. He's been serving in this capacity since February of 2019. He focuses on racial equity, economic inclusion, and environmental justice. Prior to being appointed as CRO, Ron served as a senior advisor to Minneapolis City Council President, where he worked to negotiate the passage of many policies, including negotiating a mandated increase for all of the working people of Minneapolis. Then we're going to have 2 important partners reflecting on this subject. Trevor Voltmer, who is the Ocean Conservancy's Director for Plastic Initiatives. She brings with her a great deal of diplomatic experience, having worked at the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs at the US Department of State, where she was the lead international marine debris issues person who oversaw the US engagement and the issue in the United Nations and many other international fora, and she is a retired career member of the Foreign Service. We'll then hear from Daniel Stander, who recently joined the network's board. Daniel has made a career of pushing boundaries at the intersection of risk and innovation. Over the last 20 years, he's worked on every continent, advising public and private entities on a variety of complex risks, from natural hazards, environmental stresses, terror attacks, pandemic outbreaks, and on. He is a champion of resilience finance, and he helps capital find responsible investments in the face of climate extremes. Okay, so I am going to start us off in this conversation with a question to our Chief Resilience Officers. Let's talk about the role of CROs. So to you, Adriana, what has been the role of the CROs during the current crisis, and how has it changed? During the Resilient Leadership interviews, it became clear that the role of CROs was somewhat different everywhere. And this was often linked to which levers or tiers of government were in charge of a current part of the crisis. Adriana?
Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here 1 year after Rotterdam. So I think it's a major achievement for us. And it is really good to talk about leadership. I think this network is a very good example of collective leadership. I was luckily part of this project with the Resilience Shift, and it was a very intense and incredible project. So going to the Lawrence question, so what is the role of CROs during the current crisis? I think we need to start to recognize that the concept of resilience is a shift on how we do public policy and how we lead and how we manage our cities. But also with this project, I could understand and realize how resilience is something really important on how business and how CEOs, they are driving their companies and their business. So this notion of resilience, it creates implications for leadership as well. And as CROs and urban resilient practitioners, we might have different roles in our cities. So some of us are working in strategic planning, strategic recovery for this time, climate change, climate resilience, and others might be dealing with risk response and civil defense. In any case, these are positions of leadership, and these are opportunities to bring these resilient lenses for what we're doing and how we're doing. Facing a major crisis as the COVID-19 was and it still is, this notion of resilience became stronger, more important, and ingrained in many decisions. Even if those decisions are made on the go, even if the resilient aspects of it were not very clear. During the process of the resilience shift, we had an opportunity to think, oh, this is attributes of resilience. So maybe the mayor, not consciously, he's not very conscious that he is doing something that has attribute of resilience, but it was there because we planted this seed before, so in the past. So it was very interesting to see that. And the other thing is in our role to recognize that crises are learning moments that foster disruptions and reinventions in our society. In our capacity as CROs, we have been dealing with uncertainty and learning how to move it forward, recognize new priorities and emerging needs. So we also could see some moments of disruptions and reinventions as well, and creativity as well. So I believe we are having now the chance to experience or not the dividends of resilience. So things that we've done in the past and things that we are learning to do in the future. Also, it has been a very good opportunity to critically think, how can we strengthen levels of resilience? How can we create co-benefits for society? Lauren also asked, so what changed in terms of leadership? What have you been seeing in terms of changing in leadership during this time? One very important thing is we saw emerging leadership in many ways, from top down, from bottom up, so in many different directions. We also saw, and this is, I think this is, for me personally, it's very important. We saw an element of care. So care for people became central for decision makers, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. So caring became an aspect of, to be considered taking decisions. Other aspect, it was collaboration. We saw many levels of collaboration. So it was, I think now it is clear than ever that together we can accomplish more, and collaboration is really important. Other aspect is communication. So the traffic of communication has grown a lot during the crisis. And I'm not talking about formal communication. Sometimes it didn't happen in many, political and organizational levels, but communication as team during the crisis, it was something reported that was very important. Another aspect that really struck us during this entire process is the value of data. So it was more than ever clear the importance of taking data-driven decisions and scientific informed managerial decisions. But what I think it was the profound change in leadership, it was the way that we connected. So in the way that we connect ourselves as leaders to think what really matters. Life matters. So from this exercise, I think the leadership for the future, it's much more than provide organizations with profitable return. It's way more about to bring together human values. It is about caring. It is about having empathy. So those elements will help us leaders and CROs and decision makers to make better decisions. One thing that I think is very important to mention in leaders, they are not managers. So the role of leaders and exercise this leadership is way more than managed tasks. I'm not saying that manage is really important, but leadership will think more broadly, more holistically.
That's a good.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Adriana. And I think that note of focusing on aligning values, human values, and care that you emphasized are so important and really related to the question that I wanted to ask to you, Ron. You know, the whole world watched as protests in Minneapolis happened and COVID-19 cases were spiking in the US. And you very generously shared some of your perspective along with Stuart Sarkozy-Wanaxi from our team in an article called No Equity, No Resilience. Minneapolis is all of us. That I think really highlighted some of these same principles. Can you tell us how the recent events have impacted your work as a Chief Resilience Officer?
Absolutely, and good morning, everybody. Greetings from Minneapolis here in the U.S. It's an honor to be here this morning. Happy anniversary also to the Global Resilience City Network. It's been a really awesome year since we all saw each other in Rotterdam, and exciting to see how this has evolved and progressed, even in the midst of the multiple crises that we face. To answer your question, I think that we have to start by contextualizing this a little bit, that Minneapolis, like every other city in the world, was already in the midst of dealing with a pandemic that put all of our biggest challenges with racial equity in the limelight. Further, we had an entire class of workers, right, who were deemed essential, yet what was proven was that their labor was essential, but not their livelihood. These workers were more likely to be Black, brown, or woman. Consequently, these are folks who are already marginalized and disinvested from anyway, systemically. On top of that, they were at higher risk of both contracting COVID-19 as well as dying from it, while also not having equal access to basic standards that would at the very least provide some shield of protection. And then as you all saw, the gruesome murder of George Floyd really kind of kicked off the summer. So after really being inside the house for 3 or 4 months, right, people worried about their livelihoods, people worried about their jobs, again, all these inequities kind of being brought to light. And then to see somebody, a Black man, murdered by a city police officer, it really just kind of exploded. So really our crisis is threefold. Our crisis is, of course, recovering and responding to COVID-19, subsequently the economic depression of it as a result, and then now we have this kind of global reckoning on race and the subsequent civil unrest that reflects in so many ways our most damaging stress in Minneapolis, and I would argue in the US, which is racial inequity. What we've learned in this process is that what Minneapolis has taught us, I think, is that we can only be unequal for so long, right? That this is a bit of a powder keg, that the longer that we maintain this stress of inequity, the more fearful our shocks will be exacerbated. So my role as a CRO has shifted quite a bit in the moment. Before the crises, a lot of the work was really, to be honest with you, making the case for resilience, making the case for this framework and these principles and these values to be implemented and carried forward and to be prioritized in our city making. And now, because we're in the middle of a crisis, I think the challenge before us was that there is no ethical way to stress test whether how resilient or not that we are. And this thing really showed us, just how resilient we are and in many ways that we're not. So my role has shifted quite a bit. I serve as a political advisor to both the mayor and the city council on some of these issues. But because of the work before these crises, I've emerged as a bit of a trusted community liaison as well. So really helping to connect community members to resources and then using our city resources to support their on-the-ground efforts. We wrote about it in the article that Lauren had mentioned, that we really saw the resilience of community, right? The more resilient that the community is, the more resilient that our city is. So really, I've been working to help develop the leadership capacity of the individuals and the groups on the ground that have emerged during the civil unrest. And we saw that they built their own networks, right? They built their own food transportation networks, and they built their ride transportation networks. They made sure that people had resources, right? They did all of these things without ever being resourced or financed by the city. And so what I've really been trying to do is say, okay, particularly in the period of austerity, how do we shift some of the responsibility and shift some of the support and the resources towards community, so they're the ones that keep us uplifted, right? The goal here is to believe in the power of community to shape moral and social values, and that's what we've been trying to do. Along with that, and I've been partnering with the network on this piece, is developing a framework for strategic partnerships. So what we saw when George Floyd was murdered was a flash pan of organizations, philanthropy, corporations, et cetera, stepping up and making statements and dedicating funding and resources and grants towards pushing back against anti-Blackness and contributing to anti-racism. And what we've been working on is developing a framework so that we essentially help them help us, right? So we're actually shaping how those resources are allocated. We're shaping who receives those resources and making sure that they go in the spaces that are going to be driving us towards more resilient outcomes. I've been working to connect city staff to external resources. So the network has been a really great partner in this. And there have been people all over the globe who've been reaching out saying, hey, how can we help? Hey, we have this resource, or hey, we have this tool. How can we help? So I've been trying to make sure that our city staff are connected to those people, recognizing the fact that I don't have an office. It's just me in the resilience office in Minneapolis. And so leaning on these networks, being able to facilitate these resources, has helped kind of drive us towards a better recovery here. I've also served as a liaison between governments and jurisdictions. So in the US, a lot of the COVID-19 stimulus coming from the federal government went to the states. And so being a trusted liaison between the city of Minneapolis and different multi-jurisdictional partners to facilitate some of those resources. And then, you know, a big part of this has been, how do we document and capture our learnings, right? I've learned in this process just how many opportunities that can emerge from disruption, that I'm really challenging my city and challenging my city leaders to embrace disruption, to develop a tolerance for failure as a way to drive us towards real solutions. And to really lean into discomfort and tension for real growth. I use this analogy all the time. I'm known for using analogies that may or may not fit, but I tell my city all the time that, hey, similar to a muscle, right? When a muscle is torn, right? When we work out and lift weights, we're actually tearing muscle fibers, and we build strength in that recovery. The same thing with tension, right? The more tension that we experience and we handle well in the city, the more fortified and strong we're going to be in the long term. So really challenging our city to meet the needs of the folks who our federal government will essentially ignore with some of these policies. So, you know, that, I guess, in short, that's how the role has shifted quite a bit. Being more of a connector, right, leading on some of these resilience values, showing how we can operationalize resilience in every policy, program, practice that we have. It was harder to make that case when we were just developing a strategy, but now now we're actually disrupted and actually impacted by these things, people are saying, oh, now I get resilience. Now I understand what resilience is. Now I understand that these values, if we prioritize them, and particularly center racial equity in that process, that we're going to be better in the long term. Another thing that I share with my city is that for a lot of our emergency response, and this is no shade to emergency management or preparedness, it's almost like a crash diet, right? That I'm going to lose 30 pounds in 30 days. But I make the case that resilience is not a crash diet, that even if we don't lose that 30 pounds in 30 days, it's a lifestyle shift. So I may have lost 12 or 13 in that first month, but month 2, I'm in better position to build on that progress. Month 3, I'm in way better position to build on that progress. And if I look towards the future, we have fortified and strengthened ourselves for the long haul, right? And that's what we're trying to do here, is that in the middle of both responding and recovering from these disasters, we're trying to take real learnings to make sure that we drive ourselves. You know, the resilience dividend is about multiple co-benefits. One very easy way to implement a co-benefit is to center racial equity in our practices and our programs and our policies, right? That on its face, it may impact a lot of people, but when we get specific and intentional about how we can impact the most marginalized communities, that's where we can really make good on the resilience dividend. So I've been making that case. And unfortunately, it was harder to hear before the crises, but in the middle of them and on our way out of them, people are really starting to buy into the, you know, build back better mindset, that we're not trying to just bounce back, we're trying to bounce forward. To use disruption and to use these crises is not a position to restabilize ourselves, but to transform ourselves in the midst of those things.
Thank you so much, Ron. There was a lot there. And in particular, that opening that was created by the crisis to bring in those holistic tools and perspectives and get that focus that the resilience agenda deserved in your city and really across the network. Also, you reflected on bringing tools from the network, having that holistic framework at the ready, and being able to then go back to the network and say, wait, I need a new framework or tool for something specific, like getting partners together, making the most of this moment. And I think that that's something that we want to continue to do and continue to fortify, and really to channel funds to the places where they're needed most. I think this is something that also from Adriana, we heard loud and clear, because you already have the pulse on where the most vulnerable communities are, where those flashpoints are. You can get resources to the communities that are needed most, and you can become a trusted representative between national or other philanthropic institutions and your city and your community. And I guess just ending on such a beautiful note on capturing that learning and forcing people to lean into discomfort in certain places and not shy away from the things that we would normally want to gloss over, because indeed, and I love that analogy, resilience is not a crash diet, right? It is a change in lifestyle. And so on that point, I actually want to open up this conversation. And I really hope that the remainder of this panel will be a conversation between the four of you, with Shever and Daniel, as partners who are coming from two very distinct backgrounds and also current roles, diplomacy and interacting and sort of igniting action in the private sector. How has resilience, in your view, helped urban leaders to address the current crisis? And maybe I could turn it over to you, Shever, first to start us off, and then we'll come to you, Daniel.
So first of all, congratulations. I'm very inspired sitting here. I was in that church in Rotterdam, Lauren, and I do remember that conversation. And to use an analogy also, Ron, the one that came to my mind as you were all talking is, you're basically trying to build the plane and fly it at the same time, right? And what a time to do it. I mean, this is really an unprecedented time that we're living through right now. It's not just the pandemic and the associated economic disruption in our own country, as Ron eloquently talked about. It's also about this overdue reckoning with race. And right now, it's also about these compound climate-related natural disasters that we are living through. We currently have smoke in Washington, D.C. from forest fires that are 4,500 kilometers away, as well as a hurricane, pounding on our Gulf Coast right now. So we really are living through some unprecedented times. And, I guess to me, what I take away from that is that the fact that you've managed to pull this off, despite all of that, is really an indication of how important and needed the work that you're doing is, right? And that's really the sort of upside. You've managed to do this despite all of these challenges. And I really like the way, I wrote it down, I really like the way Fania framed it. She said, she said ruthless focus, right? Ruthless focus. And I always say that we are strategically focused, but tactically flexible. And isn't that really kind of what resilience is, right? We're focused but flexible. And what are we doing in this time? Well, we've all had to pivot. A year ago, I think sitting in Rotterdam, none of us thought we would be dealing with this kind of pandemic, right? We've all had to pivot and deal with it in our own ways. We've all had to adapt and change our planning, right? What we're doing. For us, I was really happy to hear Luciana talk about data, because part of what we're doing in Urban Ocean is really a data-driven program. And we were really excited to pair with one of the leading scientists in the world, Dr. Jenna Jambeck, to help us with our assessments in the cities we're working in. We'd always planned to build technical capacity, but now with people not able to travel, we've really turned our plans on their head, right? We're identifying teams and cities that we can train at the front end to do the work we want to do. And we'll build that capacity at the front end instead of the back end, because it's the only way we can get the work done, right? We're thinking about partnerships, right? None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. So Urban Ocean itself is kind of an unusual partnership. When I talk about Urban Ocean in the ocean world, I get a lot of sort of scratching heads, like, what are you guys doing? How is this going to help the ocean? But the reality is these are complex challenges, and you need complex partnerships to solve them. And cities are the front line. They are where a lot of things are happening, and they are responsible for a lot of the things that we need to tackle if we're going to solve this problem. And so this is where we really need to be. And then finally, and I think, this whole event and everything you've done over the last year really underscores the power of networks, right? Ron talked about what he's doing in the city. You're talking about doing a city network at the global level. We're trying to build out a partnership between advocates for the ocean and the environment and cities. So that's really what we're all trying to do. So, when I think about what resilience is, the answer that came to me while you were talking is your resilience, right? So I think about, the future, and I'll end with, what Ron said. We want to not just bounce back, we want to bounce forward. So I'm really excited about this work, and I just want to congratulate you on everything you've accomplished in the last year. So thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Shever. Daniel, over to you. What do you see as the resilience change, and how leaders are addressing the current crisis? What difference does it make?
Thanks for having me. Thanks for asking, Lauren. I just want to say this conversation is so rich already. There are so many things I'd like to pick up on that Adriana has said, that Rana said, that Sylvester said. And I wonder if I could just begin by sharing, I guess, what I typically done in my career when I've been identifying, promoting, and developing leadership talent, and what that looks like through the lens of resilience, or maybe even throw it back as a question to the others, how that changes as a result of the turbulent times we find ourselves in. So the framework that I tend to use when I'm identifying leadership talent is a threefold framework, and I call it the head, the heart, the hands, right? I'm looking for a leader who can envision the future, articulate, maybe often analytically data-driven, the priorities that are required to succeed, and put in place a governance framework to monitor the progress and take us there. So kind of very rational, headstrong leadership. I'm then also looking, though, for the heart. Visions alone don't inspire people. You need to talk to people, you need to be able to talk to your employees, talk to your citizens, give them a purpose, and speak to them in a way that resonates. You need to connect as individuals. And as a leader that doesn't have that will fail. And then the third kind of dimension of leadership traits that I look for is the ability to execute in an agile way at the coal face, to innovate, get things done. That's what I'm looking forward to. And I think when I reflect on those leadership traits in a time of crisis or against a backdrop of shocks and stresses, whether the wildfires are raging or whether the floods are rising or whether the pandemic is in full flow or not, triple whammy of social and economic inequity and economic recovery that Ron mentioned. The thing that's often most missing is that middle element of heart, is that element of connecting with people when they are suffering, understanding that suffering, taking a moment to listen, to tune in, to connect. And I think Adriana mentioned that, and I think Ron mentioned that too in a way when he talked about his role as a connector. At some level, you're joining dots and joining people, but at some level, you are just making a connection with someone else. And there's been some good research on this kind of middle element of the heart that is often missing in leaders. I think it's from the Duke School at the University of Michigan. And the need for compassionate leadership in a time when resilience is so important, that's what I think has come to the fore. And those CEOs, if I think in a private sector example, who have been focused solely on the bottom line and not focused on the well-being of their staff, are the ones that have suffered. And I think in a political context or a municipal context, Mike, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking of your premier. Your prime minister has been decisive, but is so empathetic and so compassionate and really connects with people. And I think that's the dimension of leadership that has been shown up to be missing, and the dimension of leadership that is most required if we're going to do resilient leadership. I've lots of other things to share, but maybe I'll just pause there and see how other people react to that.
Does anyone want to jump in there and react to what Daniel's saying?
Can
Adriana,
I?
Yes,
Yes,
go ahead.
yes. So I totally agree with what Daniel says, and I also agree with Trevor says in terms of this is an exceptional moment to catalyze transformation and to embed change, resilient change across systems. So as Daniel said, we are totally interconnected and we need to acknowledge that. And I think this crisis, it helped us to see that, because the crisis put us in front of death in a way, in a global scale, in a way that we haven't been experienced before, at least not our generation. So it has forced us to see how interconnected we are, that we are connected systems. It goes from personal level, and we need to put the heart, as Daniel says. So we need to acknowledge this connection in a personal level, organizational level, society level, in a global scale. So I think this integration is one of the attributes of resilience. So this sense of interconnection and integration, it might help us to move forward and to make more human, more obvious that it might seem, a more human transformation of our society.
Yeah, I want to come over to Ron now because I see you coming off mute. And then Mike, since you got called out and you're staying awake with us past midnight, I'm going to come back to you as well and call you out to respond. So just get ready.
I just wanted to, build up on what my colleague on the panel just talked about, right? Which is when you talk about this heart level, what we're really trying to do with our work is center human beings and our approach to resilience. That resilience isn't just nuts and bolts, nor is it budgets, right? It's literally about how do we meet the needs of people. And at least in the US in particular, right, that part of that process has to be a reparative justice process, that we have to reconcile past injustices and then build on those things to repair them, right? Reparative justice, reparations, whatever you want to call them. We need to go through a process like that because we know that as a community, as a city, and as a country, we cannot be resilient if we have a significant population of our country who's been under oppression for 400 years and we don't address those needs, right? So resilience provides a framework to center real human beings in our work. I make the case to our budget director all the time. I'm like, look, our budget shouldn't just be a year-to-year moral document, right? We should, if we're thinking about people and centering people, it should be a generational document. How are we setting up our entire generations with how we allocate our resources? How do we make sure that employees have the things that they need so that we can deliver on some of those things, right? So Daniel, your point is, I think is well taken, and yours, Adriana, is twofold. One, we're centering human beings, but also we're identifying the intersections that human beings live, right? Where they live their lives. We know that the people who are most likely to contract and die from COVID-19 are also the people who are most likely to live in inadequate housing, are also people who are most likely not to have good access to transportation, are also people who are most likely to feel the impacts of climate change and dirty air and dirty water, right? We know that at every single point, they're the most marginalized, no matter how you cut it, no matter how you measure it. So we really have to continue to center human beings' lives, center the most marginalized, and make sure that we reinvest in those communities that have had the most divestment from them.
So I didn't even know that you were going to set up Mike so perfectly because of the work that he's done on resilience and also the work that New Zealand has done in this area. So Mike, I know that it is late there, but as you have always stayed up and put your best forward, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and in classic millennial style, because I get to claim that as something a millennial, I'm just going to say #sorry not sorry and turn it over the mic to you.
You're not a millennial, you're a Gen X, I'm sure. Okay, anyway, it's not the point. Thanks for calling me out, Daniel. But it was quite funny because I was responding to a chat from Grania, who was responding to a chat from Shaver about the importance of data. And immediately when I saw that chat and I was busy replying to Grania, I was actually thinking of you, Daniel, because I know how much you like to understand data. So yes, you're quite right about calling out our Prime Minister as a communicator, warm, empathetic, all those things in leadership. But actually, one thing that's impressed me about what we've managed to achieve here is the understanding of the science and the understanding of the data and how that informs decision making. And this, to Grania's point and Shaver's point earlier on the chat, I'm loving that chat. It's all got to be underpinned. All our decisions need to be evidence-based, driven by data, and not just data, but we've got to turn that data into actionable intelligence. And that's the key. I mean, we must never lose sight of that. I'm a big believer in the resilience theory, but actually when it comes down to it, Daniel, we've had long conversations about this. Ultimately, what's the data telling us? And how might that inform decision making? So that's, I could go on, but I won't.
Is it okay if we just keep it going as an organic conversation, Lauren?
Totally.
Absolutely. And that's what I said is my favorite part about this network. So please go ahead. And I saw Shaver, you leaning towards the mic. So please unmute and why don't you take the floor? And then Daniel, I have a sense that you're gonna jump in right again.
Go for it, Shaver.
Yeah, so I just wanted to connect the two things, the data piece and the human piece, right? We are a data-driven organization. We are mostly scientists, actually, most of the people who work at Ocean Conservancy. And, but this idea of data, it's really important that you capture the data that relates to the most vulnerable. So to give you an example of some of the work we're doing, one of the things I'm most pleased about Urban Ocean is that the city of Pune is one of our cohort cities, and they were chosen as both a mentor and a learning city. And the reason for that is because of their sort of groundbreaking work with the informal sector in waste collection, right? These are extremely vulnerable people at the bottom of the social heap. And some of the work that we're doing at Urban Ocean, at Ocean Conservancy around trash collection, you know, 100% of trash that ends up in the ocean comes from humans, but why, right? How does it get into the ocean? What can we do to prevent it? How do we help those communities? How do we ensure that when we implement solutions, we are doing no harm to the most vulnerable at a minimum, but more ambitiously trying to lift them up? So I wanted to just draw that connection between both the sort of heart piece and the data piece for the group.
And I'm going to follow up on that piece of bringing both sides of the house together, the people and the data. And I think Mike alluded to it when I think your words were turning the data into actionable intelligence, I think was the phrase you used. I talk about insights that unless the data speaks to people, it's worthless. It's the people that make the decisions. It's the people that interpret the data and the science and turn that into action. So you know, bringing that together and having good data scientists who don't just give you the data, but help you understand what the data is telling you, so you can, as leaders, can make good decisions. That's critical. And I'm thinking about, and I can't remember which of you said it, I think it was you, Shiva, who talked about you know, building and flying the plane at the same time. When I think about building and flying the plane at the same time, which, you know, by the way, you're doing in times of turbulence, which is hardly easy, what do you want? You want the right people on the plane, and you want to know where you're going, right? If you've got roughly the right people on board with you as co-pilots, and broadly speaking, you're aligned and you know that you're going north. I'm not quite sure how far north or at what speed, but that's the direction we all are aligned in going, because the data tells us that's the direction of travel. Then you can deal with building the plane and flying the plane at the same time despite the turbulence. So that idea of getting the right people with the right data, so the right people on board, and directionally we understand where we're going, then you have a chance as a leadership team of getting where it is you need to get to.
And Daniel, real quick, just to build on the airplane analogy, right? That you talk about getting the right people, getting the right data. If you have a plane leaving from Chicago, for example, and you point in one direction and it's headed to New York, if you shift just a couple of degrees, you're going to end up in DC or some other city. And so I think about that and think about what we're calling for as it relates to change. It might not take that much just to reposition us for a better trajectory, right? Part of that quick shift might just be, how do we better center human beings in our work? How do we embrace disruption? How do we make sure that when we respond, our first step is A, not B, right? And that slight trajectory could have significant longer term impacts that you're calling for.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, I don't want to bring it all back to the softer, compassionate people skills, but if you're trying to make change, you need to take people with you. You need a theory of change, and you need to be able to, again, connect. And the old tried and tested leadership models of command and control, they can kind of work in crisis when you need quick answers and there are obvious solutions and you need to move people quickly. But if we're going on a longer journey together, that's not sustainable. That's top-down only. And I'm quoting someone called Chaim Omer, who I like, and he talks about connection before correction. So if you need to course correct, if you need to change behavior, you cannot change people's behavior unless you have a connection with them. So I'm kind of coming full circle back to the need to be able to speak compassionately, understand the other person's situation, step into their shoes, join them empathetically, and then we can go on that journey together and make those small degree shifts that you're talking about, Ron.
And Laura, I'd like to jump on Daniel's and Rhoda's comment, and something that Ron mentioned before, that we need to do this work, and work not only for that group of people now, but we need to think about generations. So, and take this metaphor of the plane, where the plane is going. I think something really important, and it's how can we leave a legacy in our cities, in our community about resilience. So how can we actually influence legislation? How can we influence norms to bring these resilience lenses for the future, and to actually put these in place and to be an action, to be part of an action. So I think with these crises, lots of vulnerabilities were disclosed. So we are dealing with domestic violence in many places, child abuse, alcohol abuse. So racism, it was a problem before, of course, and got exacerbated in some places. The lack of tolerance. And so we had kind of, in some places, I think in many places, a disclosure of all diseases, other diseases, social diseases of our society as well. So I think to drive this plan, this airplane, you know, for a place, we need to think, and some of us are doing already, how can we make this, our legislations, our norms, our ways to work and to make decisions informed by data and by science in place for next generations? So how can we make a legacy of resilience? Back to you guys.
You know, I think part of how we build that.
Come in on that one, so I'm going to give you the floor.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Part of how I think we build that is by, you know, developing a culture that embraces disruption, right? Because we know that these disruptions that we're facing are quickly becoming the rule and not the exception. And so that instead of going piece by piece and trying to respond to all of them, we have to completely do a complete culture shift and position ourselves to embrace disruption, because we know that as stress causes disruption, disruption leads to introspection, and introspection leads to improvement, right? So we should start to see these as opportunities for us to get better and to test where we are as it relates to our resilience, right? That we leave a legacy by connecting and passing down these values from generation to generation, these approaches of city making from, you know, city to city and generation to generation, right? That we build upon the things that we learned via the disruption, and position our communities to be more adaptable, right? To be more creative, to support their creativity with real funds and real resources, so that as we see more disruption, we almost go on autopilot, right? We know exactly how to respond because we know we've invested in our communities, we've invested in their leadership, we've looked at our budgets, we know how to move in a period of austerity. We go down that checklist of resilience principles that positions us to then, you know, really shape a generation through our work.
So on that note, I want to start to bring us to a close. Not closing yet, but I do want to ask all of the panelists to really build off of what Ron was just talking about. How do we leave this legacy of resilience and not lose what we've learned in the current crisis? So how do we cement those learnings? And so I'm happy to open it up to anyone who wants to take that first. Daniel, I see you've come off mute. Did you want to add to that, or did you want to nuance the question?
I wanted to jump in, but I don't have answers. But what I'm pleased you went there next, because kind of that's what I was thinking of going as well, picking up on what Ron just said about legacy. A lot has been written on the paradox of leadership. And the paradox of leadership is essentially the tension between short-termism and long-termism, right? So I'm drawing on my experience in the private sector. The short term is delivering your quarterly results. Your long term is building an organization of relevance over the long term with shareholder value and an underlying purpose. Right? And that tension's always there, and the leader needs to be able to deliver on both at the same time. I don't have answers as to how to ensure long-term legacy, but what I do know is that during times of status quo and in times of turbulence, both of those things are required. A leader who can lead for the short term when fixes are needed, and a leader who puts a legacy in place and builds something of relevance that transcends the individual, and what they build is bigger than themselves. And so maybe that is the heart of any answer I have right here. And actually it's what inspired me to lean into this organization when there are people that work day in, day out, that put their own needs, they subjugate their own needs to the higher purpose of resilience. So this network will continue to succeed because it's being driven by people who believe more in the thematic purpose than they do their own individual success. And so maybe that's what comes to the heart of turning it into legacy, or at least that's the first answer I come to if we want to maximize the long term as well as the short term.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'm going to ask if Adriana should have our final thought. I have to ask you to keep it to about 1 minute, because I do have to then bring us to a close and make sure that we move to the next session, because we've got a deep dive right after this. So Trevor, I see you nodding. Can I come to you? And then Adriana, I'll bring it to you to bring us home.
Sure. So just to pick up on threads that pretty much all of the panelists have mentioned, you know, we've been in crisis mode, right? And that is not by choice. But, you know, how we build out the legacy is as we move into legislative packages, legislative changes, building this into that, making sure that things are properly budgeted, making sure that there are changes that can support resilience. As we move forward, that's, I think, how we build a legacy and how we build this in going into the future. So, you know, in the US, we do have an election coming up in less than 2 months at this point. And we're already starting at Ocean Conservancy to build out our scenarios of what do we want? What do we want in a new election? You know, what are we going to push for legislatively? What's our agenda? How do we ensure that that supports the work we're doing? So I think that's one way that you move that forward.
Thanks, Trevor. Adriana, for a final comment.
Well, I agree with Ron and Trevor, and I think this network, what is precious about this network, it is a lot about people. And what I see, what this network can do is not only support cities, but also support organizations and business to bring these resilience lenses. So I think we have, as a network and as part of a resilience movement, I think we have an opportunity to make a transformative recovery in our planet. And I think we can elevate some aspects that are very important to us. Inclusion, diversity, sustainability, care. So I think this network can help us to keep more focused on what is essential, and what is essential is people, lives, and how we live in our planet. It has been a pleasure to be in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Daniel, for such an inspiring conversation. I really am just terribly grateful to all of you, and also to Grenia and to Mike for the presentation earlier. This is a prime example of why we hold this space for the network. We hold it to fill it with resilience. And that's so much of what we want to do going forward with different partners and with all of the cities across the globe. So this is very much not the end. It's just actually the end of the beginning, as they say. And literally in terms of tonight as well. So I want to remind everyone that we have another deep dive session coming right after this, which is Equity within a Green Recovery. The link is in the chat. If you haven't already registered, there's a specific login, and you can access that in the chat. And also for guests who are in Asia Pacific, the US West Coast, and other similarly friendly or unfriendly, depending on how you view it, time zones. We'll have a deep dive tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Singapore time, on supporting vulnerable populations through a circular economy. So please don't miss those sessions. Again, thank you so much to all of the panelists. We have a video message from a partner and ally who needs no introduction, Ms. Maimouna Sharif, Executive Director of the United Nations Human Settlements UN Habitat Program. Thank you all so much.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure to meet fellow mayors, city managers, and citizens as we work towards building resilient cities and communities. I always look to mayors and citizens to get updated as you are all on the front line like during this current crisis. It is important to know where we stand in order to know where we go. At the moment, the total confirmed cases affected by this COVID-19 is around 26 million people globally. According to the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, over 863,000 people have lost their life. Every single country in this world has been affected by this global pandemic of COVID-19. The largest numbers of casualties and infected population are in cities. Our data shows that 95% of the cases are in urban areas. This is not surprising, as most of the world's population live in cities. COVID-19 does not differentiate between continents and neither between countries nor cities. Population density, lack of urban health support systems, poor governance and preparedness, they all contribute to how cities deal with the COVID challenge. We need to ensure that going forward, we build back better and greener, mainstream risk reduction policies, and ensure our cities are truly resilient by turning policy into practice. Colleagues, we are all in this together. This is why the work of this network is so important. We must be prepared to future-proof our cities. UN Habitat's catalog of services, recently launched at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum in New York, provides guidance and opportunities for collaboration. This is our way of contributing towards the Secretary General's guidance in the report on COVID and urbanization. As frontliners, I urge you to appeal to your governments to support multilateral action, as a global pandemic like COVID can only be resolved if we all work together. We must also make sure we build resilience to face multi-hazard challenges as well. My heart goes out to the people of Beirut who has to face the explosion at the time of COVID and economic depression. UN Habitat is working with other UN agencies to ensure that we help the city to rebuild and thrive again. As you all know, UN Habitat's commitment to disaster risk reduction and resilient building has been proven by the many years of support to cities around the world towards sustainable urbanization process. The rationale is simple. While we all know that most of the world's population live in cities and that urbanization is irreversible, we must make sure cities are safe places for communities to thrive through the generations. Let me end on a more cheerful note. UN Habitat is ready to play an active role in the Global Resilient Cities Network. I also urge you to look up our website for the catalog of services and let us join hands to celebrate the upcoming Urban October. The world needs strong networks to overcome the COVID challenge. I look forward to receiving innovative ideas from all of you so that together we ensure no one is left behind in an urbanizing world. Thank you.